Art isn't about just pretty pictures for decoration. It's also a language we use for grief, courage, hope, and belonging. In every era of turmoil, artists have shown people a way through, sometimes with humor, sometimes with shock, sometimes with beauty, always with honesty. My name is Krista Cloutier, and I've spent many years publishing and exhibiting political art. My files have been collected by the Archives of American Art and now live at the Smithsonian Institute. This topic is in my blood. But this isn't a lecture about political parties. It's a workshop about tools, how artists have used symbolism, community, authorship, and craft to open hearts and change conversations. Take what serves your practice, leave what doesn't, and above all, keep making courageous art.
I think that it's important to talk about the power of art. And it's not, as everyone in this room knows, art is not just about pretty pictures. Art is about communication. And whether that communication is personal or collective, it's historically, art has been a powerful medium for processing emotions. Uh, as I said, personal and collective, but also for instigating social change. And I believe if we look back at our cultural history, we'll see that some of the most powerful, some of the most creative, some of the most enduring works have come out of times of strife. And art movements in the past have gained their power by creating community, which is super important right now, by maintaining their creative freedom while engaging with politics, even when they have to go underground, which has happened to a lot of our artist brothers and sisters. And also, I think art movements in the past have gained their power by finding innovative ways to reach new audiences, which is important to every artist, right? The old ways are falling away. And this is really a time when we need to think outside the box and how do we connect with people, whether we're making political art or not. So, the power of political art is that it can really help to process the complex emotions that we're feeling. It can document important moments in time. It can create dialogue and understanding. And it can inspire hope and action. So, for example, think about the protest songs of the 1960s that were speaking out against the Vietnam War. They really instigated change. Um, More recently, I guess, we think about Banksy is a visual artist who comes to mind. Barbara Kruger is a visual artist who's been making political art her whole life. So it's got a rich history, and I am going to go back into history and give you some examples of more political artists who have influenced me and influenced a lot of others. So when I was an art dealer, I ran Segura Art Studios. I was the director of this company, and we were known for the quality of the work we made in our studios, but our focus was really on work that made political statements. And we love to work with underrepresented artists. And my job was to introduce them to the marketplace and to build an audience for their work. So as I said, I'm really well familiar with political art. The market for political artists is not the traditional market. If I was representing an artist who's making work like this, for example, which I did represent because that work was made in my studio by an artist named Tony DeLapp. That this kind of art has a different audience than political art. By and large, political art, I would market it to museums, to nonprofits, to libraries, and to universities. There are people who collect political art, and there are people who will maybe don't normally collect political art, but they would buy it because it speaks to them. Sometimes they didn't recognize it as political, and that's okay. I didn't have to tell them. Do you know what I mean? Like, if they're responding to it for their own personal emotional reason, who am I to go in there and say, actually, this is a statement against blah, blah, blah? Um, they get to have their own experience of the work. But as I said, there are a lot of people out there who do collect political art and who are very interested in this niche. And as an artist, there's absolutely nothing wrong with niching. In fact, there's something very, very powerful about niching. So just because the audience is a lot smaller, don't be afraid if this is an area you want to get into. I'm going to give you some examples, as I said, in a bit, but I want to share some of the effective approaches for making the work, for making political art, using symbolism, for example, and metaphor as a way to convey complex ideas. This is what a lot of political artists do. They can also document real community experiences and stories. They can create participatory works to engage viewers, which is really effective. And also, I think they build bridges across different viewpoints through shared human experiences. Not always, but these are different tactics that artists have used to make political art and get it out there. Before I share the examples that I'm going to give of political art and their impact, I want you to be looking for some common themes among the artists that I'm going to be showing you, because all of them, I think, challenge the dominant cultural narratives. They are using traditional forms in new ways. They are addressing issues like identity and power. They're creating work, and this is really important, they're creating work that educates as well as provokes. You know, being provocative for the sake of being provocative is not really that interesting or helpful at the end of the day. But work that can touch people's hearts and minds, that's where the power is. So a lot of these artists that I'm going to talk about, they've influenced both art and social movements. So art doesn't just live in that bubble. And they'll sometimes combine their personal heritage with their political messages. So the first one I wanted to talk about is actually my favorite. I don't know, most of you might know, maybe I don't talk about it enough, but I am completely enthralled with Charlie Chaplin. He's my hero. He's, as an artist, I just love Charlie Chaplin. And his film, I have to get him out of the way first because I could actually spend all hour just talking about Charlie Chaplin if given half a chance, but it's not that kind of call. But his film, The Great Dictator, he made that in 1940. He was living in America when he made this, and America hadn't even joined the war yet. It was still out there. It was still a couple years away. So imagine, I don't know if you've all seen The Great Dictator. Everyone's seen it. Such a great film. It was actually banned across America in several cities. It was banned across Europe. But he felt it was super important to make this movie against Hitler because he saw the danger that Hitler posed. And he felt that the best way to take a political stand against Hitler was to make fun of him. And I see this again and again with a lot of political artists, that they use humor. So Charlie Chaplin, The Great Dictator, was incredibly effective. And apparently Hitler was a huge Charlie Chaplin fan. And in fact, he had that little mustache because he copied Chaplin. And they say that when the film came out, Hitler, of course, banned it, but he went to watch it by himself. He had it screened in a room and he watched it by himself. And he never spoke to anyone about what he thought about it. We can just imagine. And if you haven't seen The Great Dictator, I urge you to watch it. And if you don't have the time to do that, just YouTube the speech from the great dictator, because this is an artist looking into the camera and speaking his truth after using all of his talent and all of his experience to make this really, really beautiful film. That's all I'll say about Charlie Chaplin, I promise. Uh, Another one that we all know and love is Guernica by Pablo Picasso, right? He made that in 1937. And did you know that that is 11 and a half by 25 and a half feet high? It's massive. He wanted it to have impact. And I have to say that Guernica actually impacted me. And that was the painting that got me interested in political art when I was in university and first saw it. So he made this piece, this masterpiece, I should say, in response to the Nazi bombing of Guernica during the Spanish Civil War. And it has become a universal symbol of the horrors of war. And it's still referenced today in anti-war protests. It helped to raise international awareness and tons of money and many thousands of volunteers to fight against the fascist violence in Spain. And we continue to look at it and to really feel something by this piece. Let's see, that another one that really spoke to me was the AIDS memorial quilt. That was made in 1980 or started in 1985. And the artist's name was Cleve Jones. And I don't know if you remember 1985, but so many of our friends and family were dying around us. And no one was saying anything because it was so shameful at the time. AIDS was considered incredibly shameful, and everyone was also terrified of it. So Cleve Jones started this memorial quilt project where victims of AIDS would be memorialized in a, what did they call it? In a panel of the quilt. And it helped to destigmatize AIDS. It helped to humanize the epidemic. It helped to bring community together, right? Families who couldn't talk about losing their loved ones were able to come together and say their name out loud and say what happened to them. I'm going to get teary just thinking about it. See? And it created visibility. He had the courage to create visibility at a time when our media and our government did not have the courage to be talking about what was happening. Today, there are over 48,000 panels on that quilt. And my cousin David Cloutier is one of them, I'm very proud to say. So it's an amazing piece that really changed public perception, and it influenced the policy of the governments. Ai Weiwei is a Chinese artist. Maybe you've all heard about him because he's actually been imprisoned by the Chinese government for his work. I was thinking specifically about his Study of Perspective series, which he did, where I think it was over the period of 8 years, as he would travel around, he would take photographs in front of seats of power, like the White House, for example, or different. I think the Eiffel Tower was one of them, and places in China. And he would take a picture of it, but he would be giving it the finger in the same picture. And I mean, we can kind of laugh at things like that, and it's like, oh, that's kind of cute, that's kind of cool. But he was actually imprisoned. The Chinese government frowns on political art, but it didn't stop him. And he has gone on to influence a whole generation of protest photographers. And a fun fact is, a few years ago on my birthday, I actually got to spend the day with Ai Weiwei. It was completely unexpected. I walked into the gallery where I was working in London, and he was there. And there was a show of Chinese art at a nearby museum, and he invited me, and we walked there and looked at the show together. And it was a huge, huge to meet this really great, incredibly brave artist. Should I go on? Do you want to hear more? Okay. Judy Chicago. This is another artist that I've known and worked with. And I think most of us know her masterpiece, which is called The Dinner Party. It took her 5 years to make this piece. She did it collaboratively, and she wanted to make a piece that celebrated women's achievements in culture throughout history. So women at the time in the 1970s were not invited to the table. So she made a table called the dinner party. And it's a massive table. I think it's at the Brooklyn Museum of Art right now. I think that's its final home, though it's traveled around the world quite a bit. And she made place settings for great women throughout history, noting their accomplishments. And she really pioneered feminist art as a collective art practice and feminist art in education. In fact, she established the first feminist art program in California. It was at Fresno State. It was the first one in the country. In the 1980s, she did something called the Birth Project that was like the dinner party, but she was reclaiming, or probably claiming for the first time, childbirth imagery in art. Something, we couldn't see because it was too much for some people. And she was saying, no, this is beautiful. Let's look at this. She really challenged the male dominated art canon. When I went to college, I studied art history, and the text we worked from was about this thick, and it was called Jansen's History of Art. It had been around forever. Everyone's nodding. Everyone studied from Jansen. And until Judy Chicago, there were no women in Jansen. And it was Judy Chicago. I don't know how she did it, if she called Jansen or she called the publisher. Judy Chicago is a force of nature. Let me tell you, this woman is unstoppable. If she sees injustice or if you tell her no, she will push until you say yes. So Judy Chicago, I believe, was the first woman included in Jansen's History of Art. And now, of course, those doors are open so much wider to women. When I worked with her, you've probably heard me talk about this project. It was called the Delta of Venus. It was an amazing project that she did with us. She wanted to make a series of prints, and in her mind, she saw them in the way that they would look. And we actually had to invent a whole style of printmaking just to create what she was seeing in her head. And she was good for it, man. We had to break the project up into 2 3 week periods because, I mean, think about it. She was already in her mid 60s when she made this project with us. So she worked for 3 weeks straight. Then she went home and rested for a few months. Then she came back for another 3 weeks straight. She made us raise all of our tables in the studios. So she only worked standing up. I hired an intern from the university to help her. And it quickly became apparent that I needed four to keep up with her. That's how amazing she was. She would go to the gym every morning, and she'd work out, lift weights until 10 a.m. when she'd show up at the studio, and she would work through lunch and she would work through dinner. And I mean, artists can't always work like that. That's why she had to go take a long break, but she was there and she was focused and she made this beautiful piece that was very much about women's sexuality. And at the time, the museum, there was a museum called SMOCA that collected our archives. So our studio by that time was 25-ish years old, 20 years old. And for years, this museum had collected one of everything we created in our studio. So they held our archives. They had a new director this year that Judy had been there. And this director thought, well, this is a lot of money, going towards this one studio. I'm going to take everything they did this year, but I'm not going to take that piece. And Judy found out. I told Judy that. And she did not take that lying down. She immediately tried censorship because the work was really, really provocative, highly sexual. And next thing I know, the newspapers are writing about it. The news wanted to bring cameras in. They wanted us to, Judy organized a talk against censorship that she was inviting all these people to. It just quickly became something much bigger than I ever expected. But that's Judy. She's like, no, we're going to push and we're going to push hard. And the museum director was furious with me. I have to say, I was terrified of her. I was terrified of the position that I was being put in, but I knew that Judy was right. So I backed her up and we did it. And someone came in from the museum and anonymously purchased the work for the museum and donated it to them as a way to like make this whole thing go away because the museum was quickly finding themselves in the middle of a battle that they never ever imagined that they were going to get caught up in, especially as it was this new director's first year. And then they put the work away, right? But at least it was included in the collection. Judy felt vindicated. I felt good about it. And I feel even better that the last time I visited the museum, that work was proudly being shown in a vitrine. It was amazing that it had gone full circle. I wanted to tell everyone in the museum, do you know the story behind this? You know, you get to see this because I didn't, maybe a little. So that's the story of Judy Chicago. She's an amazing artist, and she is like a rock star. I've known a lot of well-known artists, and Judy Chicago is the only one that every time I walked down the street with her, it was like I was walking down the street with Mick Jagger or something. People just know her, and they just love her. And look, she built this incredible career as a political artist. It's really really inspiring, and to see how she's led and influenced so many other artists. Another artist who I'm really pleased to call my friend is someone named Jean Quick-to-See Smith. She's a Native American artist who combines indigenous traditional art methods with contemporary art methods. And she often works on environmental issues and also on Native rights. And her impact has been huge. She's the first Native American artist to have work in the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. She's really challenged the stereotypes of Native American art. She's brought attention to indigenous environmental issues. She's created a whole new visual language combining traditional and modern elements of art making. And she's written lots of books. She's taught all over the world, and she's become a really important mentor for younger indigenous artists. And when she came to work at our studio, I had such a crush on her because she inspires everyone around her with her intelligence and her dedication to the kind of work she's making and the things she wants to say. Enrique Chagoya is another artist who I worked with in our studio. And he's a Mexican born artist who lives in the Bay Area. And what he's done is he's created what they call a reverse anthropology to examine cultural power dynamics. So he combines like pre-Columbian imagery or native imagery with pop culture. And he uses these different kinds of images to critique colonialism, American colonialism and imperialism. So the work is very relatable. It's very funny. Again, we're looking at humor in art, but it's incredibly powerful. So he's pioneered new approaches to cultural critiques. He's influenced a lot of conversations about border culture. And today he teaches, he's an art professor at Stanford University, where he continues to influence a lot of young people. So these examples have really shown how art can document injustice, how it can create empathy, how it can build movements, how it can challenge authority, how art can change public perception. I've seen that happen in real time, how it can influence policy and inspire future activists. So we are at a time in history right now when art and civic engagement are super important to a lot of us. We've all seen the attacks on libraries in the past several years, but I'm here to tell you that it is really spilling into other cultural institutions too, like museums, like public art projects. So this is really an important time for artists to stand up. It's an important time for artists to stand together. It's an important time for artists to lead. Whether you're interested in making political art or not, it's really a time for us to be closer to our communities and to support our institutions and our artists, brothers and sisters. But I'm also have to tell you that civic engagement is not without its risks. Um, it's not easy to stand up and speak truth to power. And there's a lot of people, fascist leaders throughout history, have been incredibly threatened by art. An example that I lived through was an artist we were working with named Roberto Hueso. He was from Latin America. And he came into our studio and he made great, big, huge pieces of torture victims. He was, I believe he was in El Salvador when people were disappearing off the streets, and his brother-in-law disappeared. And he said that every morning he would get up early and he would go outside the city, the borders of the city, because there were body dumps there. And the government wasn't admitting that people were disappearing, but they would dump off bodies and relatives would have to dig through to see if they could find their missing loved ones. And as he dug through the bodies, he saw all these signs of torture. And so he came back to our studio and he drew them, and we made very large scale prints out of them. And it was actually several years later when I got a call from him saying, take them down, take them off your website right now. The government's seen them. My family's had to flee the country, and there's actually men with AK-47s at my door right now. So that's very real. When I was working at Segura and we were making a lot of political art and putting them up on our website, it was kind of, I was there for the early days of, when art galleries or art studios would have websites. And at the time, I'm sure you could still do this, we could dial down, we could look and see who is looking at our website, like where is our traffic coming from? And from a marketing point of view, that's a really wise thing to do. So every month I would look to see, which cities and towns are most of our views coming from. But consistently, the most frequent city that was looking at our website was Quantico, Virginia. And I didn't have any art collectors in Quantico, Virginia, but the FBI is located in Quantico, Virginia. So we can only assume that that's where all those views were coming from. And then there's another risk as well, and that's the risk of going into sensationalism. There is an artist who is a very, very big name in the art world and who is known as a political artist. And this is someone that we had worked with before I'd been there, but we wanted to work with again. I went to New York. I went to his apartment to talk about what a project could look like. My first kind of warning sign going into his apartment was that work that he had made in the past, which had been incredibly controversial and ignited a lot of political discussion, the work that he was making at this point was more, it looked to me like bestiality, and it wasn't very I didn't like it. Let's just say that. It wasn't palatable to me. I didn't understand what he was trying to say with it, and I was really not comfortable with it. And we sat down, and my partner and this artist and I were trying to think about, okay, if we did a project together, what would it look like? What would the ideas be behind it? That was really important to us, especially when we saw the work that he had been making recently. We wanted to kind of rein it back in, and he had a massive collection of crucifixes that had come from 16th and 17th century churches in Europe. And some of them were just gorgeous. And he had one wall that was just stunning. He had huge ceilings, and it's just this stunning wall of ancient crucifixes. So we talked about the idea of photographing those crucifixes And we'd been talking about the death penalty, and there was a man at the time who was on death row. He was an African American man, and there was a lot of activism around his death sentence, which was coming up, and a lot of people felt that it was unfair and they didn't want to see him put to death. And so we decided that this artist, this photographer, would go into the prison and photograph this man, and we do something with the crucifixes. And this was the idea behind the work that we were going to make. As I started to work on the permissions to get this photographer into the prison, governor of the state, he found out and he changed the law or the rules or whatever. So no photographs could be taken of prisoners. So suddenly that door became closed to us. He closed that door to us, so we couldn't do that. He blocked us. And then this photographer started asking me if I could get him invited to the execution so he could photograph that. And this is where I started to feel uncomfortable again. And I wasn't really sure how to navigate this space because I didn't want a political statement to turn into sensationalism. You see how that line can be really difficult to identify. I couldn't get him in to photograph the execution, as it turned out, happily. And then this photographer said, get me Manson, get me in to photograph Charles Manson. And suddenly I realized that I'm doing something with crucifixes and Charles Manson on the same piece of paper. And we didn't feel comfortable with that at all. So even though this artist was a very big name and it would have meant a significant amount of revenue and attention for our studio, we were very, very aware of having of that line between sensationalism and activism. So that's just something to really, really pay attention to. I made a video, I think last year, about someone in my family said to me, you know, people like you, and she was talking about artists, and I just love it when people say people like you, because you know, you have to like gird yourself. And she was talking about artists, and she said, people like um, you think the world is like all these different colors, but it's not. The world is black and it's white and it's gray. And people like you who think it's made of colors are immature and ignorant. And I didn't take offense at it. Instead, I felt sad for her. Mm. You know, people who see the world as black and white and gray, imagine what their life is like. And that is one of the beautiful benefits of being an artist, is that we see the world in rainbows and technicolor, right? And we bring color back to the world. So that's, you know, that's how we are leading. That's how we are saving the world as artists. And your work doesn't have to be political, and your work doesn't have to be overtly political to be political. There's a working artist in our group who works, and she keeps telling me, my work isn't political, my work isn't political. And I'm like, actually, I had to tell her, it is. But she works with the skin of fish who are like, they've introduced fish to the wrong habitats and they're like eating everything. So, you know, we need to get those fish out of those habitats. So she's making art out of their skins as a way to share that story. And she's like, but I'm not taking a political stand. And I said, but your work has Michael knows this, your work has a political intention. You know, it has an intention. Maybe it's not political with a big capital P, you know, maybe you're not showing the face of, you know, different politicians or whatever, but work that has an intention like that, I would say, is political. But I don't think we should really get caught up in labels either. I don't know that that's really helpful, because again, then we get into the black and the whites and the grays, right? And our role is to just keep showing the world color. I opened a gallery in Mesa, Arizona, and we moved the studio there. They had just broken ground for $100 million art center. Mesa is an extremely conservative town. It's the second biggest Mormon population outside of Salt Lake City. And how we were able to squeak through that bill so that we could open $100 million art center is kind of amazing. But we did, and they broke ground and they started to build it, and it's pretty amazing place. But just as they were finishing it, the citizens of Mesa realized like what they had done and what they were inviting to their downtown, you know and it was conversations, visual conversations that they didn't want to be having, a lot of them. So there was a huge protest, and they wanted to sell it before it ever opened, and they wanted to turn it into like a sports arena or a convention center, but not art. And they were picketing it and everything else. And so I was on the board at the time, so we were working on different ways. And one thing I found was this artist in Alabama, and what he had done is he had painted people in the community, really, really large scale portraits of them. And some of them were like the cleaning lady to the CEO to the this and the that, like just all kinds of people, Black people, white people, and big, big portraits, and then invited everyone, the whole community, to come to the unveiling of these portraits and let people see each other and celebrate one another. And it was across political divides. And I can't remember what was happening in Alabama at that time, but I remember the person who had introduced me to this project had told me like what a massive success it was to
Okay.
see the CEOs in the same room as the cleaning ladies, and to see those conversations and have them take their pictures in front of these pieces. I personally don't believe that any other human being is my enemy or is against me or is the problem. I think it's fear. I
Yeah.
think fear is a problem, and the more we can assuage fear, um, the stronger we will be, and the more we can empower others to you know to lessen the rhetoric, to stop demonizing others, because it's just fear.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if we go in there as artists and put out a bunch of scary things that are going to like be in the face of people, that is going to be provocative, and some of that works. Um, but there's a lot to be said you know, for beauty and for showing people our commonalities.